Welcome back to our seventh week of Getting Beyond. How are you? Today's session is called Asking Questions in a Setting of Polarization. I'm sure that you know many people today that feel misunderstood. People are bitter and they're angry at society in general because society is changing in many ways. It's largely because we no longer have the common code of ethics that our country originally was based on. That's the Judeo-Christian value system, which was itself based on scripture. So I recall an incident during COVID when I was in Walmart, and all of a sudden a man began shouting at the top of his lungs for a supervisor. And when one didn't come as quickly as he would like, I mean, you could hear him through the entire store. He began denigrating the store and then cursing. And I thought, oh, I hope he doesn't have a gun. It was a bit of a frightening situation at that moment, but that is just an example of the state of our society today, which is ruled by so much deep anger. Because of stress and differing viewpoints, we have a state of what is called polarization. Polarization is the complete opposites, contradicting one another. The magnetic poles, for example, one attracts while the other repels. And if you try to force these two groups that are contradicting one another together, they will rub along if that's what's required of them. But as soon as the force that forced them together is removed, they push apart immediately again. You can see this in a little way during hurricane cleanup. If you've ever been involved in cleaning up a neighborhood after a hurricane, it is surprising how neighbors that are secretly irritated by one another all of a sudden are looking to one another for support, help, comfort, provision, and guidance. Then, when the hurricane cleanup is completed, they retreat into their homes, never to speak with each other again until the next storm. So let's look at the church for a moment. What are the things that divide us? 100 years ago, we probably would have cited denominational differences were pretty much the only things that divided us. Or perhaps during the mid 1800s, about 160 years ago, we would say the Civil War, slavery, non-slavery question. This is a point of history which greatly interests me. Through my family history research, we have seen firsthand a glimpse into how divided our families, our communities, and our churches were over the slavery issue. For example, I had my three times great grandparents on both sides of the conflict. My Culbreth and Fulk families were Union supporters living in a heavily divided area of southern Illinois. They even requested in their wills that their headstones state which organizations they supported during that conflict to prove they were on the winning side. On the map, you can see the black counties were pro-slavery, while the cream counties were pro-freedom. The red dot in the middle of the black counties was my family's, which were staunch pro-freedom. My two times great grandfather, David Smith Carnahan's family, was at the center of the Underground Railroad through northern Illinois. His uncle, also called David Smith Carnahan, was operating as a station master, hiding runaway slaves in northern Illinois at great personal risk of imprisonment, loss of his farm and other belongings, and fines of $1,000 per runaway discovered. In today's currency, that's equal to $39,100 for each runaway that a person was caught helping. The divisions were so strong and the fervor around the matter so heated that his Presbyterian church actually split over the issue. And he went home that night after a heated exchange to begin his own church, the Free Presbyterian Church, in support of his position of freedom for slaves. On the gravestones still standing today on the former family farm, you can see the secret hand signal of the Underground Railroad engraved on the headstones. Today, what are the issues in our culture and our society that divide us? By the way, this graphic is not intended to communicate any particular position on the issues, as we may suspect from the colors. Rather, I just liked the graphic. And the issues are those which are common in our society as a whole. Well, we have the pro-life, pro-choice conflict. Even though there have been some states putting sharper restrictions on abortion, as a nation, we're still performing abortions at a rapid pace. There's same-sex relationships and marriage, gender identity issues, promiscuity rampant in our society and also present within the church, living together without benefit of marriage, sex before marriage or outside of marriage, and adultery. There's the use of alcohol and drugs recreationally, political persuasions such as left versus right, current events like the war with Iran and the war with Ukraine, pornography in our society and in our schools, the content of our educational system, immigration in general and illegal immigration in particular, the use or misuse of tax dollars, i.e., government fraud. I'm sure that other issues are coming to your mind as we are going down through this list. There is no doubt there are grave divides in our culture and society today. These same issues spill over into the church because we have a difficult time of leaving our issues at the door when we enter into the church building. Judging by the input we all receive from the media in particular, or from our own personal experiences, in your opinion, how divided do you think we are as a society over issues such as we've just listed? Do you think it's a 50-50 division or something else? I think we need to reassess just exactly how polarized we really are. It's a subjective issue because a majority of people often don't speak out about these polarizing issues, choosing rather to remain silent about their personal positions. I watched a fascinating edition of American Thought Leaders where the program host, Janja Kellick, was interviewing Jonathan Butcher, acting director of the Heritage Foundation Center for Education Policy, about his book, The Polarization Myth, in which he describes a survey he conducted in the research of this book. I'm going to show a trailer, or rather an introduction to that edition of the program, American Thought Leaders.
We don't allow young people to diagnose themselves with a sprained ankle or with pneumonia, but when they say they were born in the wrong body, we say they need to be socially affirmed and we should move them along the process of pursuing counseling and then ultimately physical changes that will last with them forever.
In this episode, I sit down with Jonathan Butcher, acting director of the Heritage Foundation Center for Education Policy and author of The Polarization Myth: America's Surprising Consensus on Race, Schools, and Sex. He uncovers what his new survey of more than 2,000 Americans tells us about who is really driving the culture war and who quietly disagrees.
There are clear majorities in the survey that I conducted for my book, and the idea that you can change your gender is not popular with the American public. There's a shared sense of national identity on this question.
Butcher argues it's a loud minority amplified by media narratives, while a quiet majority shares common sense beliefs about merit, family, and community.
If you start with the family, then you can build the community, then you build the city, then you build the state, then you build the nation.
Are Americans actually more united than we think? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Janja Kellick.
There's also good news, though, and that is that the benefits of asking good questions outweigh the minimal effort that's involved in trying to create some good questions and to bring about reconciliation. In Matthew 5:9, Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." We need to try and follow Christ's example and work to bring about reconciliation between people. Even if we can't reconcile their ideas, we need to train ourselves to think, I may not agree with this person, but can I learn to better understand where he's coming from? If I show understanding, maybe I can eventually share Christ's love. At least I can pursue peace rather than war. Also, we have 1 John 4:20 and 21. Whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love his brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. John chapter 4 is a very familiar passage about Jesus with the Samaritan woman at the well. And I love the way The Chosen portrays this. It puts it into a perspective that I just personally didn't get completely from reading it in the printed form or even hearing the story preached. If you have access to The Chosen television series, you can watch it in their free app, The Chosen, or on Amazon Prime. I would suggest watching season 1, episode 8. I love the way our author David gives the background for this story of the woman at the well, and I'm going to just read the background straight out of his book. Quote, back in the Old Testament, there were 12 tribes of Israel. After Solomon's reign, the 10 northern tribes split off from the 2 southern neighboring tribes. The northern tribes began serving idols and eventually built their own place of worship in their capital city, Samaria. The 2 nations, northern Israel and southern Judah, crowned different kings and eventually ended up fighting each other. The northern tribes were conquered first. Victorious Assyrians deported many captives to other countries and imported foreigners to Israel, forcing those remaining to intermarry. To the southern Jews, these people in Samaria became half-breeds. The tribes of the north lost their identity and became, quote, the 12 or the 10 lost tribes of Israel. By the time of Christ, the true Jews wanted nothing to do with these Samaritans. They held them in contempt. To them, these people were dogs. Jews wouldn't talk to them or travel through their territory. Like Jews and Arabs today, everyone knew they didn't get along. But in the passage of John 4, Jesus deals radically with these issues. He travels through Samaria instead of around it. And I love again how The Chosen depicts one of the first journeys that the disciples make with Jesus. While all the disciples consult the map in order to go around Samaria, Jesus bypasses them and continuing to walk as he intends to break with tradition and go right through Samaria. He has a divine appointment waiting for him at the well. Tired from this journey, the Lord stops at a well to rest. Along comes a Samaritan woman to draw water. Now, we won't go into the significance of Jesus talking to a woman here, but suffice it to say, he went against the norm again. Still, notice how he initiates a conversation with this woman by making a simple inquiry. May I have a drink? The question was appropriate. They were at a well and he was thirsty. As you read, you'll see how Jesus shows respect and compassion for this woman. He doesn't tell her that as a Jew, he disagrees with everything she represents. He looks past their differences and begins a constructive conversation by asking a simple question. His question startles her, yet this simple question begins a wonderful conversation which soon brings reconciliation between the Samaritan woman and her Lord. Her life is changed. She becomes this incredible evangelist. Because of her witness, all sorts of people from her city become a part of Christ's kingdom. States of polarization are all around us in our world today. We have one individual now who encounters polarization in his everyday life. Hal Graves has been a court mediator for the past 10 years. In this capacity, he has mediated countless cases, thereby helping polarized individuals sort out their grievances and come to a settlement, avoiding court cases before a judge. He's going to share a little about his experiences today. You're going to find a video interview with Hal Graves. Simply pause this video and play the interview with Hal, then resume this video. As we know from this verse in Proverbs, which is chapter 15, verse 1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Now, based on this biblical principle, what sorts of phrases might you use to help diffuse a heated, polarized conversation? Perhaps pause the video and discuss among your viewing group. Afterwards, resume the video. Another state of polarization exists today in countries who live under governments with which they disagree. And I'm speaking specifically about the Cuban government and the individuals who do not support or agree with the government. We have young people today in our country that are thinking socialism, Marxism, and communism is a good thing, and they are pushing for these changes in our own government. There is seemingly no comprehension of what they are asking for. We are pleased to have a firsthand witness of the Cuban Revolution, Aleda, who will share some of her experiences. Now, if you're viewing in a group, pause the video and watch the video about Aleda. Afterwards, resume this video. I believe we in the church at least have a common base from which to begin moving beyond polarization, and that is our own personal relationships with Christ. So, my suggestion is to practice reconciliation techniques by asking good questions, and we can begin with persons around us in our everyday lives. The authors give us a great list of people with whom we may experience polarization, either inside or outside of the church. These examples are not as extreme as we've just spoken of, but they are relationships which cause people to stay separated from each other. Here is that list, and you'll want to photograph the list as it will be used in our homework. Number one who doesn't share your faith in Christ. Two, a person who's at least 15 or 20 years older or younger than you are. Number three, one who represents a different nationality. Number four, a person who is a family member you often argue with. Number five, a person who worships at another church. Number six, a person who has different values than you have. Number seven, a person you usually disagree with. Number eight, a person you had a problem with in the past. Number nine, a person you haven't seen for a long time. 10, a person who is of a different religion altogether. And number 11, a person who thinks differently than you do about the role of, and you can fill in the blank there, the role of whatever in the church. The suggestion is made to choose one person from the list that is different from you. Our author David went through the list and he decided to pick a little girl. He was in his mid-50s and the little girl was 50 years younger than he was. She spent a lot of time in his home and she had a load of energy and she liked to talk. David's problem was that he didn't know anything about her world. She loved television shows. And he never thought about Big Bird or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He had to learn about her world in order to begin a relationship with her. One final thought about polarization within the church. Sometimes there is simply an underlying cause for polarization, and that is unforgiveness. When I was praying about how to present this session, Bernie mentioned a book we had on our shelf, which neither of us have fully read yet, only glanced casually through about 6 years ago before putting it up on the shelf. The book is called Total Forgiveness. Once Bernie mentioned this book, I replied, "Oh, yeah, that is good. Maybe for another time, though." But the Lord wouldn't let me leave the thought. So after putting all the PowerPoint together, he prompted me to open that book. And I did not get past the first 3 pages before it became obvious that the subject matter was deeply connected to our topic of polarization. So here are a couple of passages from this book, Total Forgiveness by R.T. Kendall. In the introduction, it says, "This book is by far the one that has the greatest potential to heal the human heart. Forgiveness is one of the most needed, relevant subjects Christians can study today, though it is often neglected or put aside. Perhaps it is too difficult, or maybe it has simply fallen out of fashion as a subject of sermons and study guides. But if we remain less than expert forgivers, we cripple ourselves in every area of life." He goes on to illustrate the above with a couple of stories about others who learned their need to totally forgive those who wronged them. And then he concludes with his own personal story. So here is story number one. The wife of a minister, Margaret, told about a woman who had been in a car accident 22 years earlier. Her neck had been in constant pain for 22 years. And because she could not turn her head to look into the rear view mirror of her car, she had to give up her driver's license. Margaret asked if she had ever prayed for the driver of the car who had caused the accident. She replied, no. Margaret suggested the woman pray for him and forgive him. So the woman began praying, I forgive him, I forgive him. Margaret then said, now bless him. The woman began to bless the man and the pain left. The next morning she could move her neck for the first time in 22 years. Now, here's the second story. It's about a woman in her 40s whose father had terribly abused her. The woman claimed she had said to the Lord, I forgive him, over and over again. But despite her prayers, she had continued in having a heaviness of spirit. Margaret suggested she bless her father as well. The moment the woman said, I bless my father, the heaviness completely left. So the final story is the author's own personal story. He describes telling his friend of a wrong that had hurt him deeply. And his friend responded by telling him, you must totally forgive those who have hurt you so deeply. You will be in chains unless you totally forgive them. Release them, and you will be released. The author states no one had ever talked to him like that in his life. At first, he was angry and he felt hemmed in, but it was a pivotal moment for him and it changed his life. He recalled the verse, Proverbs 27:6, which says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. He then describes his deep hurt, which resulted in a heart full of hurt and bitterness, which daily almost interfered with him performing his pastoral duties. He assumed that since nobody is perfect and all of us sin every day, the bitterness in his heart was no worse than any other person's transgression. So he believed that God understood and sympathized. He says he rationalized his attitude and behavior, but after his friend told him he must confess, he must totally forgive, when he finally did it, he describes it as being the greatest thing he had ever been asked to do. He began to forgive all those who had hurt him, and a peace came into his heart that he says he had not felt in years. He states, I was setting those people free, forgiving them, and letting them off the hook forever. He continues, if I allowed myself to think about what those people did, I would get churned up inside, and the sweet peace of the Lord would leave again. He says he began to notice a cycle. Whenever he allowed the spirit of total forgiveness to reign in his heart, the peace would return. But when he dwelled upon with resentment the likelihood that those who wronged him would never get caught, his peace would leave. He finally had to make the important decision. Which do I prefer, the peace or the bitterness? It cannot be both ways. He concludes by saying we only hurt ourselves when we dwell on what has happened to us and fantasize about what it will be like when they get punished. Most of all, he continues, we grieve the Holy Spirit. And this is why we lose our sense of peace. When you decide that you want to try and break through a state of polarization with someone, the first thing is to decide or make a conscious effort to get beyond the debates and the arguments. Don't concentrate on rehearsing your convictions so you can let them have it with both barrels. Instead, ask yourself these questions. How can I better understand who this person is? How can I begin to relate in a way that will bring about reconciliation? Trying to ask questions in a setting of polarization is not a natural thing, and so it takes quite a bit of thinking to come up with some questions that you might utilize in the healing process of a polarized relationship. I'd like you to think for a moment, is there one person that comes to mind immediately when you hear this term polarization? I'm not asking you to name who the person is, only to keep that person in your mind, and let's begin praying for one another that we can have opportunities open up, that we will be diligent in creating questions to help break through the polarization with these individuals. If you're viewing in a group, you might choose to let your group know that you'd like them to pray for you as you navigate the way forward to reconciliation in a polarized relationship. Now, I realize this has been some pretty heavy content today, so we are not going to have questions on this topic. I will leave you to mull over the content during the week. We will now have one group interaction. If you are viewing in a group, you'll want to pause the video and ask one of the questions that will appear on the next slide within your group. Take about 15 minutes or 25 minutes total. Afterwards, resume the video. Now, here are those questions. Question 1, name someone who had a positive influence on you as a kid. How did they affect your life? 2, who is someone you would like to meet? Why? 3, what's a day you would love to relive? Why? What hobbies did you have both as a kid or now? Question 5, what personal dream do you hope will come true? 6, how would you change yourself if possible? 7, how are you like your dad and like your mom? 8, which parent are you most like and in what ways? 9, what is a film, an article, a podcast, a Facebook post, or program you've enjoyed recently, and what about it intrigued you? Again, you might wish to photograph these questions because they're going to come back at us. And this is our homework. You're going to use the list of the 11 categories of people that we had earlier. Fill in the names of someone who fits each category. Choose one and write some questions you could ask to open a conversation. I'm going to review the list now on this slide. 1, one who does not share your faith in Christ. 2, a person who's at least 15 or 20 years older or younger than you are. 3, one who represents a different nationality. 4, a person who is a family member you often argue with. 5, a person who worships at another church. 6, a person who has different values than you have. 7, a person you usually disagree with. 8, a person you had a problem with in the past. 9, a person you haven't seen for a long time. 10, a person who is of a different religion altogether. 11, a person who thinks differently than you do about the role of, and you fill in the blank, whatever it is, the role of that topic in the church. So we've reached the end of our session on polarization, and I hope you have gotten some tools for dealing with difficult relationships and that you will try to reach out to someone soon to begin the process of understanding someone who is very different from yourself. Thank you to both Hal and Aleda for their participation today. And our next session is our last session together, so I look forward to finishing strong. See you then. And as always, Sasha says, see you soon. Bye-bye.